we go, we're live. Hello everyone. Delighted to introduce my new voice panel. Hopefully they're all here. We're having a few problems with internet. Do you want to start us off an introduction to yourselves and your books? And we'll start with Nikki, because you're next to me at the top.
Hi, I'm Nikki Coppelston, and I write. I've written 4 detective novels set in Wiltshire. They're police procedurals. The most recent one was the Promise of Salvation, which came out last year. We're just writing the 5th now, about a third of the way through, I hope.
And then Kate.
Yes, hello there. I'm Kate P. Adams. I write 2 cozy mystery series. The first is the Charlton House Mysteries. That's the first in the series, Death by Dark Roast. And so far there are 8 books in that series and more to come. And then this year I launched the Joyce and Ginger Mysteries, which is a spin-off from the Charlton House Mysteries.
And Steve. Oh, we've just got a glamorous picture for Steve. No. Moved slightly, didn't he? No, I don't think we've got Steve. Well, we try and sort out Steve. What drew you both into sort of writing crime?
Shall I go first? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, my journey into crime writing. A long story that I'll try and keep short. I first published a management book in about 2018, and around the same time I moved to the US, and I loved the process of writing and producing the book and working with an editor and all that kind of stuff, and I thought I'd like to do a bit more of this. And I suddenly remembered that many years ago, 20-30 years ago, I had dreamt of writing crime fiction and thought, okay, I'm going to have a go at writing crime fiction. And at the same time, I had just started reading some cozy mysteries. Typically, I like to read a lot of police procedural and slightly darker stuff, but had picked up a few cozies. And at the time, because I'd moved to the US and was kind of dealing with that transition and everything that was going on in the world, it was fantastic because there were no politics, there was no blood and gore, there was no violence, all that kind of stuff. And for a period of time, I really needed to escape everything that was going on with that sort of thing. So I thought, okay, I'll have a go at this. And yeah, I had a go. I loved it. They started selling. And at the time, I didn't have a green card. So I had the time and I could just start writing. And that was what I did. And then I didn't need to worry about finding work because it had gone very well. And I just kept writing. And yeah, that was how a short version of how I turned to murder.
And Nikki?
Well, I'd always written, and I'd written several novels, but they weren't really any particular genre. And I think I was a librarian in my day job, and the job got quite busy at one point. And I kind of parked my writing for a little bit, thinking, oh, I'm never going to make it with this. And then I used to live in Salisbury, and a couple of murders happened in Salisbury within the same 24 hours. And it just kind of switched something on, I think, in my brain, this idea, well, perhaps I could write a crime novel. And I couldn't really set it in Salisbury. I couldn't call it Salisbury because these are real murders that had taken place, and it wouldn't really have been appropriate to call it Salisbury. So I called it Barbary. But it did get me thinking about sort of putting myself in the situation of one of those victims who'd just been, she'd gone to do some market research. She'd stopped on her way home to pop into the public loos off the Southampton Road in Salisbury, and a peeping Tom had attacked her and murdered her. And I kept thinking, well, the sort of thing you just wouldn't expect to have happen to you. You think you're safe, it's broad daylight. And it just got me thinking about the impact of these murders on the real people around the victims. And that was the first one, which was violence. But then I kind of parked that for a long time. Started a sequel, The Shame of Innocence, which I finished after I'd taken early retirement. And I was a bit ashamed of that first one because it was quite outdated by then, because it had been sitting around for ages. And so all the technology was different. They hadn't had mobile phones. So I thought, oh, what do I do? And I actually decided to rewrite it to bring it up to date. So I'm glad I did, because it was quite a risk. But I'm glad I did, because it is properly the first Lincoln book. But that's really how I got into it. It was almost stumbled into crime writing. I'd always enjoyed people like P.D. James, Ruth Rendell, and so on. So it seemed very natural, and that's really what I enjoy writing now.
I think we had Steve. Hi, Steve. We had Steve briefly. He did a whole swirl around, but he's gone again, I think. Now, what intrigued me both for you two is that you both said you made up your locations. They are based on sort of real things that you know about, but why make them up? Why invent the location and not go for a real one?
Well, with mine, initially it was because, a certain hesitancy that I was going to create a whole series that was focused around one building, one historic house, and killing people off was going to have to involve people who worked in there and lived in there. That it was largely about not getting in trouble, to be honest. But also just the creative freedom it gave me, that I got to create from scratch an aristocratic family and their entire history. It also meant that I could sort of play around with the architecture and the history of the building. And because in my past life in the UK, I used to work in historic buildings, one of which was Hampton Court Palace. So I wanted to be able to, I suppose, create my own history and be able to stitch in things that interested me. So, for example, with some of the stuff that appears in Charlton House, it can be everything from the Boer War gets a reference. Connections to botanical explorers who were based in London gets a connection, and I can kind of create this sort of fantasy world and explore whether it's history, whether it's things around conservation and the running of a building, all that kind of thing. I had a lot more freedom with my own place. What I have done, though, is I've placed it very firmly within Derbyshire. And a number of the references are to real places. Bakewell gets a number of mentions. Buxton gets a reference. And in fact, the first book of the Joyce and Ginger Mysteries is entirely set in Buxton. And what I've basically done is stitch together a historic house using various influences that would make sense. It doesn't look like a complete patchwork quilt that's illogical. I've made sure historically it makes sense. And I've dumped it right on top of where Chatsworth House is. So I've sort of played with reality a little bit. So it just gave me an awful lot of more creative freedom, really, was the main reason for me.
Nikki, you touched on yours a little bit, didn't you? The reason, but...
Yeah, so yes, because I didn't want to call it Salisbury because I didn't want anybody saying, oh, you've taken those real murders. But it also gave, as Kate was saying, it gave me some freedom because I could use a lot of the landmarks that I knew local people would recognise, but I, renamed a lot of them, most of them, not everything. But it meant I could have shrink the distance between certain places for the purposes of the plot. And I quite enjoy sort of putting little references in. So if anybody knows Salisbury, they know the traffic can be absolutely mad, particularly going down the Southampton Road. So wherever Lincoln is going, if he's coming back along that way back into Barbary, he's always stuck in a traffic jam. But it does give you that freedom to use the sort of topography as you wish, and have local references. And yes, I use quite a few place names like Warminster, Amesbury, Salisbury Plain. The Groveley Wood, which goes sort of along over the sort of the Wiley Valley, I call that Greywood Forest, and that features in the books. So I kind of borrowed real places and renamed them, but quite often, yes, I've perhaps relocated them slightly or made them bigger or smaller, just so it fits the plot. So perhaps somebody needs to get somewhere in a certain length of time. So I perhaps shrink the actual distance that it would be really on the ground.
Do you find there's any bounce So I'm going to try to get Steve back in again. Bless him, but I don't think we're going to succeed. Do you find there's any problems with that, though? Do you find there's any downsides to kind of making up your own?
Oh, I think for me the one downside, although in some respects it's quite a nice downside to have, is that because I'm creating from scratch somewhere with a getting on for 500-year history, I really do have to keep an eye on making sure I keep everything accurate from book to book. And I've had to draw up, a family tree for 20 generations of the Fitzwilliam Scott family and all this kind of stuff. So making sure that all ties together well, that if I'm making historical references for things that did happen, that it absolutely matches the timeline that I've created for the historic house and the history surrounding that and the history surrounding the family. I mean, it's great fun because I get to do this and play around with the family and create dukes and duchesses and all that sort of stuff for the historical characters. But it really does. I mean, I need to keep an eye on it and make sure that all fits in terms of the story and what I've created, but also that it sits perfectly alongside reality, because the history that I'm talking about is real, did happen. It might just be that my duke fitted in, but it's interesting, it's fun. They're not historical mysteries in that sort of sense of the genre, so I'm not having to go into minute detail though, but it certainly means with a span of 500 years I've really got to be on the ball with what I'm doing. And I tend to, in terms of things like the geographic element, like Nikki was mentioning, I've actually made sure that I'm measuring the miles and making sure it's accurate. So that side of it, I don't need to worry about. I'm sure that's the sort of thing you've got to keep track of, Nikki. So you've got different differences, but that side of stuff I've kept as sort of simple as possible.
Yes, I found it sort of fairly useful not having it based on a totally real place. That I've been quite open about the fact that I have, adapted the original Salisbury to fit. One thing that cropped up in 2018 was the Novichok incident when the Skripals were poisoned, and because everybody thought, oh, this sleepy cathedral town of Salisbury. You think, well, actually, they haven't read my books. But how will I deal with that? Because the book I'm writing at the moment is set in the summer of 2017. And I'm thinking, well, do I take it up to 2018? Do I make reference to the Novichok thing, or do I just never quite get there? I don't know. It's a bit like people wondering, should they cover COVID in their books or totally ignore it? It's something you probably can't totally ignore, but I know a lot of writers were thinking, do they cover it? Do they just push it out of the way, pretend it didn't happen? Hard to know. But no, I feel a certain amount of freedom being able to make things up and still put in those little local references, which readers seem to enjoy, but not worry too much about sticking to the exact facts.
That sounds good. It's like, I guess for you with the Novichok thing as well, because you made it up or like invented the location, you can get away with it.
Yes.
Oh, look at this. Kate Thompson's just commented. She said, Kate P. Adams, my maiden name was Scott and I was born in Charlton House. Coincidence?
Fantastic. That's great.
Just angling for a character sort of appearance in.
Absolutely. I'm sure it can be arranged.
In a future book. I don't think we've got Andrew watching, but he likes to ask if you guys, or like the authors that are on, have their books in libraries and on audio.
My books are available in libraries, or libraries can order them. That was one thing that I was very keen to do, was to support local libraries, having grown up spending a lot of time in libraries and very many happy hours. So yeah, libraries definitely. If they're not there, then ask the staff, they can be ordered. Audiobooks I've not ventured into yet. That is a plan of mine, but I've not started doing it yet.
Yes, my books are in libraries, but not audio. My publisher doesn't do audio, and I haven't yet ventured into that myself. Though it is something I know a lot of authors have done. But I'd love to have a link in audio, but not yet.
Is it? Do you So Nikki, you're with a publisher. Kate, do you publish independently?
I'm independent. Yeah.
I'm with Silverwood Books, so self-published. Silverwood Books are based in Bristol.
And I guess that's sort of the problem of getting them out onto audio then as well.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So they're available as ebooks, but not audio or large print, unfortunately. It sort of varies from publisher to publisher, but not possible with Silverwood at the moment, anyway.
Not tempted to read them yourselves?
I don't like the sound of my own voices.
Yeah, I've had a couple of my friends have said, "Oh, why don't you read them yourself?" And I think, well, being a narrator is a skill within itself. It
is.
If I was to do an audio version of my management book, then yeah, I would probably consider that. But I think with fiction, it's a real skill. And I mean, I've done things where I remember ages ago as a gift for my wife. We were having a long distance relationship for a long time. I now live in the US, and we were doing a relationship. I didn't have a lot of money, so I decided that as a Christmas present, I would read a book and record it. So basically did a self-recorded audio book, not one of mine. It was a wonderful book by Sandy Toksvig, and I read it and sent the files to her as a Christmas present. And boy, was it hard work. I love the book. I love reading it, but I was kind of slogging away by the end, going, oh my God, how much more? And so all credit to those who do it for a living. But I wouldn't want to steal a job from somebody else as well.
I'm sure there is an author who does it. I think both Mark Billingham and I'm fairly sure Marion Todd reads some of hers.
Yeah. I know one or two people who've done it, and I think that because it's not a sort of skill of mine, or I'm not desperate to do it, anything that I'm doing around my business, the question I always ask myself is, would I be better writing? It's that sort of, some of the business aspect is a sort of 80-20 principle of what's going to be the benefit of this. And if it's something, that is not my skill, or I just think it'd be much better writing another book and publishing another book. So I'll write another book rather than read the previous ones.
It's also about the distribution, isn't it? Whatever format you do audio, unless you do it something that's sort of online, obviously with the libraries, you've got CDs, and the MP3 players that libraries get. But I don't really know quite how audio works sort of now with independent authors. But it's something I'd love to do, but I just don't think it's practical at the moment. As Kate said, I'd rather be writing.
Yeah, we've got a comment on here saying that you really need a professional narrator. They can make or break a book.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I know that there's a friend of mine who she writes in a completely different genre, and she talks about how there are narrators who are almost like movie stars, and readers will listen to anything that they put out. It almost doesn't matter what genre it is, but they're sort of obsessive fans of a particular narrator. That it's a big business, and it can be a big deal who you choose to do it. And like I say, eventually I'd like to do it, but I want to be able to put the time and effort and thought into it and make sure it's done properly. And whether that's because I organise it all myself, or that's something that I contract to somebody else. But yeah, it's huge, and I wouldn't want to get it wrong.
How do you find doing the marketing kind of aspect of your book? Have you ventured into like other social medias? So we had a quiet conversation going on in the group about people being on TikTok the other day.
I haven't ventured into TikTok. I'm on social media quite a bit, but I probably don't do enough to market my books. I really ought to do more. But again, it's time, and it's kind of confidence and thinking, is it worth it? because you do get downhearted when you don't make sales, or you just don't get the exposure that you want. And it's ironic, isn't it? If you don't get exposure, you don't get sales. If you don't get sales, you don't get exposure. It's one of these vicious circles that quite hard to break out of. It's very easy to get downhearted and just discouraged. But because I'm on social media probably more than I should be, but I haven't tried TikTok. No, that's one I haven't tried.
Yeah, and it's also finding where your audience is. So I do a little bit on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. The biggest market for me, well, I do Amazon advertising, that sort of thing. But it's my mailing list. I've got quite a large mailing list and a big following of readers in that respect. TikTok I haven't tried because I know that for mysteries it's a much smaller audience with TikTok. Romance tends to lead the way with most marketing. If you want to see what's happening, you follow romance writers first, because they're doing it all first. And TikTok is massive for romance, absolutely huge. There's a couple of people I know who are mystery authors, particularly cozy mystery, and they are now having a go at it and putting a lot of time and effort into it and trying to build that audience. So I'll be watching very keenly what they're doing, but they're kind of paving the way. So it's not an immediate place, certainly for a cozy mystery author. I'm guessing it's kind of the same for police procedural and that sort of thing. But maybe that will change and that will expand. But yeah, I've certainly found that having a big, strong, I've got about 10,000 people on my mailing list. And I really sort of fostered that. And they know a fair bit about me, and they love following my travels. I'm on the road quite a lot. And I give them, bits of research I've done and that hasn't made it into the book. And I've not enough. I've done a couple of videos with Q&As, that sort of thing. And they really enjoy that, and they love the personal interaction. So that's kind of the route that I went down initially, was the paid advertising and sort of really fostering the community through a mailing list.
Sounds like a good idea.
Yes, I've always been told that mailing lists are the way forward. I just haven't done enough with mine. I mean, it really does goad me into doing something and trying to get those people to sign up to the mailing list.
Yeah, it's quite a commitment initially, but it's once you get it going and you get in the routine. And again, I view it as just another form of writing. I love creating the newsletters. I love putting them together and telling them my stories. And I used to journal quite a lot. I used to write articles, and I've done bits and pieces in the past. But again, it comes back to, okay, what are my skills? What am I good at? What would I rather be doing? And I would much rather be writing in one form or another. So writing my newsletters is another form of writing. But some of them are more like articles than just, my book's on sale here or what have you. I like them as much as possible to come across as articles in many cases. So I kind of go, well, I enjoy writing, so I'm just going to do a bit more of that. Stick it in an email.
Sounds good. So I'm going to give you one of our group's questions now, which is, have you ever acted out a scene as you've written it?
Acted out a scene?
In writing?
I tend to read what I've written and sort of listen to how it sounds, and quite often, I work really hard at scenes of dialogue, particularly the crucial scenes where it's almost a turning point in the plot, and I will work at that really hard and kind of pare it down and think, well, would she say this? Would he say that? How would they respond? And I do find that very useful to really sort of get into the heads of the characters and really try to work out what they'd say and how it would come across. As I say, really pare it down to the bare minimum, really, to make it really effective and punchy.
I kind of have. I find sometimes that saying stuff out loud, being in my office on my own all day, I'll often kind of talk to myself anyway. But I will typically go for a walk once or twice a day, and I'm sometimes speaking out some of the lines. And actually, what I've taken to doing is making sure I have my headphones in, so I don't look like I've completely lost my mind, and it looks like I'm having a sort of sounds like I'm having a strange conversation as I walk around. A couple of the characters in particular are great fun to write, and I will often sort of come out with their lines and do a little bit of banter. But I also, because I'm trying to get the voices right, and it could be, you know, the Duke of so and so, and it could be, you know, somebody who, I don't know, a member of staff who speaks a bit like me, and I will speak it out loud to try and then make sure I've got the tone right and the expression right. Because I think one of the things that I've tried to make sure I develop is a sense of voice, and that they really do sound like different people, which can be very difficult when you're starting out.
It's crucial, isn't it, really? You need
absolutely.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way I find of doing that is saying the lines out loud quite often, particularly if I've got a long running conversation going on and it's a long stretch of dialogue, then yes, I will do that. And like I say, talk to myself as I go for walks, and steal it with my earbuds. But I used to work in theatre, not as an actor, but I used to be in theatre quite a lot. So the visual aspect is really important to me. And it's one of the things that my readers say is that they love the fact that they can picture the buildings and the houses and the sort of quite ornate houses that they're in, because the concept of a set and then the voices really stayed with me because of those days in the theatre.
That's good. Some of our some of our other authors have done things like tie up their partners to see if they could escape from a thing. We've had people who put themselves in the boot of a car.
Okay.
I've never done that. So it's been quite useful when my husband has got experience of using firearms, and that is quite useful. But no, I've never, that sort of role play, I've never actually had to take that far.
No, I don't fancy putting myself in the boot of a car, but a couple of my books, I've taken the characters down to London, and they go to some quite nice cocktail bars. So I've quite happily recreated the scenes in the cocktail bars in central London. Yeah, research. Now that's much more my idea of acting out the scenes in the books.
But you can see why it's a group favourite question now, because we get some crazy answers.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. Oh, yes. I mean, I am quite sort of fastidious about trying to work things out. So, for instance, you know, somebody makes a cup of tea, and I kind of think, well, how long would that take to make? And then are they still holding the cup when they're having a conversation? And then you discover that they sort of perhaps said 2 sentences, and the cup of tea's finished. You think, no, that wouldn't be. So I will perhaps act out those sorts of things to make sure I've got the continuity right and I've got the timings of things right. But not actually tying anybody up or anything like that.
I think people would probably say with mine that there's a fair bit of drinking in mine for Cozy Mysteries, quite a lot of alcohol, and mine finish their drinks fairly quickly. But I know some fast drinkers, so I know it can sort of be based on reality. And of course, writing Cozy Mystery, there's not going to be a lot of sort of detailed murders or murder scenes and things. That's not what they really want. Although, funnily enough, it's something that, because further on down the line, there's a police procedural series that I want to write, and I'm really looking forward to a bit of gore and blood and some bad language. I'm quite
So, would either of you consider sort of writing sort of a spin-off? You got a standalone in you because you both write a series? Do you think you'd ever write a standalone? Would you write outside of like the genres you're writing in currently?
I mean, I did start to write is it romance? It wasn't really romance, but it was certainly there wasn't crime. When I first left my job, and I've got all this time, I can spend my time writing. At that point, I'd kind of parked that very first Lincoln book, and I didn't think I'd go back to it. So I started this book it was about 4 women. They had to kind of keep getting older and older as the longer it took me to write it. But and it's really kind of how they'd all got to this particular point, and there's a crisis and everything changes for them. But my heart wasn't in it, and I think I like writing from a male viewpoint. Not all the time, and I found it quite hard always writing just from these 4 women's viewpoints. And I felt like introducing a male character whose viewpoint I could use. And that didn't quite work either, so I kind of I've parked that for now. But no, I write lots of short stories, and you know, they're from quite different viewpoints, and some of them are ghost stories. I hadn't realised until recently how many of the short stories I write are ghost stories. Almost none of them are crime, but yes, I think perhaps I mean, I know standalone sort of psychological thrillers are popular. Perhaps the days of police procedurals are over. I don't know, but for now, I still feel I've got a lot more to write about Lincoln, so I'm going to stick with him for the time being.
Yeah, I mean, the second series I've started is a spin-off, but it's still within the same sort of vein. I've written a collection of short stories where some of those are characters that very briefly appear in the series, and they've gotten their own short story. But my plan, I've got 2 more series that I know I want to create in the coming years, one of which is a police procedural, which is a spin-off from Charlton House, but I don't want it to be as cozy, and that's going to be very interesting. And I'm going to have to be quite careful because some of my readers will come with me, and I'll have to make sure that they're sort of forewarned that, you know, the language won't be quite as clean, or, I mean, I'm not going to go all out, but I do want it to be much more realistic in that sense. So police procedural with a little bit more violence where it's appropriate, that the language is going to be you know, a little bit more on the edge. So I do want to branch out and do that. I read quite a lot of historical mystery, and I do a lot of research for my books, and to date I've not tried to venture into that, partly because I don't have the time to do the sort of research that I would want to do and would expect to do. It's not something I want to rush, and particularly my, you know, my background working in places like Hampton Court and working with historians and archivists and all this sort of stuff, that I don't want to get it wrong. I know too many people who read my books who are really, you know, who know their stuff. So I want to reach a point where I can slow down on the publishing and really dedicate the time to that and do the research properly, and just not rush it. So different crime genres are certainly things I want to venture into. A bit more of the historical fiction. Would I do a standalone? Very possibly. I do. And that might be where the historical fiction would come in, is that, you know, I have all these characters that I've referenced from maybe 200, 300 years ago. Would I like to write about them as a standalone? Actually, yes, that would be really quite nice. And I read so much other stuff from completely different genres that I could easily imagine that I would like to venture into something else. I think what I need is about 36 hours in the day, the sort of
Yes.
ideas, and want to keep going. But absolutely, I'm not intending to stick with cozy mystery at all. I'm going to branch out into other areas, some linked, some not linked, and yeah, just going to keep going. So watch this space. Yeah.
Will you do anything set in the States?
Yes, I'd like to. I think at the moment, well, what I would do initially is probably have a couple of characters from one of my existing series come over, because I'm still very much looking at it as an outsider, and I don't feel that I am familiar enough with the American language and with the regional accents and all that kind of stuff, that I would probably get quite a lot of it wrong if they were all American characters and it was just a sort of insular American story. I would have to write it from the perspective of an outsider. So I would like to, there's a couple of characters that I would like to bring over to New York, because that's only 90 minutes away from me. So, you know, lots of research trips are possible. So I would, but absolutely from the perspective of an outsider, because that's what I am. And we often have a lot of fun, either my wife and I or my friends and I, with the different sayings and expressions. And I'll use a British expression. Like the first time I used the expression, Bob's your uncle. And the look I got off my American wife was, what? So I had to explain the history of that phrase. So that would be a lot of fun. So yes, absolutely. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? The different sort of use of language, even in just different regions of the UK.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, and having a book set in Derbyshire, but then thinking, you know, I've got a character who's from Yorkshire and a character who's from Lancashire, and even I'm having to do my research to make sure that, you know, you want to make that known in some way, and is there a particular phrase or what have you, and I mean, I've lived all over the UK before I came here, but yeah, the differences are enormous, and it's fascinating and wonderful and great fun to explore.
I can imagine. So what are you both working on at the moment? What are you writing currently?
Well, I'm working on the fifth Lincoln book, which is about the disappearance of a piano teacher and the shooting of a man who had worked for the Ministry of Defence. Was he working on secret stuff? So I'm about a third of the way through that, with lots of ideas about how it's going to develop. I'm just trying to get back into it now, having taken time out to write short stories and other things. But I hope to get that out next spring, I hope.
Yeah, I'm working on the second in the Joyce and Ginger mysteries, and for that one, I've taken them down to London. The character of Joyce, her mother, was a Tiller girl. And so it's been really interesting reading about the history of the Tiller girls and finding out more about that. So I take them down to London, and there is a sort of historical murder from the 1940s that took place, in which Joyce's mother knew the victim and the friends, and they were all sort of people who worked in the theatre. And now one of them has been killed now in sort of 2022. And Joyce is trying to solve that murder and sort of learning more about her mother, which is nice. I lived in London for some time, so I was able to go back there and do some research and bring in places that I loved, bring in theatre and my experience of being backstage at theatres, which were a great place for murder mysteries, with lots of corridors and darkened corners and nobody knows where the doors lead, sort of thing. And then sort of attitudes to being a single parent in the 1950s, because that is sort of an important factor in it and that kind of thing. So a London-based story with a lot of reference to sequins and feathers and high-kicking dancers.
Sounds good. Are you going to publish your short stories, Nikki?
I don't know. Probably not, but I'm perhaps only on my blog. I just don't think there are enough of them really to put an anthology together. I think they're perhaps all a bit too different, perhaps, to make a coherent whole. But I think I really want to concentrate on the novels for now. But no, I'll probably put them on my blog and let people be able to see them on my website.
Well, then you've got a store of things that you could later publish. Yeah,
exactly. Yes, yeah.
I mean, I'm sort of on the side at the moment, finishing off a short story that is a little police procedural story, which my readers will get free through the mailing list, hopefully the next month or two. But then I kind of hold on to that. There were about 8, I think, in the book that I published. One was a short novella, and the others short stories. And one of those was a Christmas story, which my readers got for free sometime in December as a kind of Christmas gift. And then it appeared in the collection when it was published. And that's sort of, at the moment, I'm not planning another collection, but I do want to write a few. And, they're all edited and proofread, and they're all... I'm not going to let anything go out there that isn't of high quality. So they get them as gifts, and then eventually, at some point, I can publish them, and it's another asset, really.
Maybe for both of you, you might consider as well, like occasionally sharing one with our shorts. We have a regular short.
Yes. I did do one a couple of years ago. Yeah, and
we do them like 4 times a year, I think. The next one will be scary shorts, which will be sometime around Halloween.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, that'd be a great idea, actually, because I do like to do a few a year. Yeah, absolutely. It's such a different form of writing. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to do it, was to challenge myself and to try something different. And also, typically, I write the first draft on a manual typewriter. It's kind of fun and a bit different, and just uses my brain differently, I find. So that's a fun way of doing them as well. But yeah, that's a great idea. I might be sending some your way.
Or Will Templeton's way. Will puts all our shorts together.
Yeah.
Perfect. Great. Yeah.
He's a man for that. but they're very good. I do love like when they're posted in as a reader. I very much enjoy the sort of seasons of them in the group, and I've sort of discovered authors. We've put together an anthology as well for charity in the group, and there are so many authors now whose books are on my like instant buy list from shows and like the anthology and things that have just
yeah. It's interesting because I mean, some people might think that the short story, because it is so short, does it really lend itself to a mystery and resolving that story? But there are some fantastic, short stories out there. There was a great Christmas collection with people like Val McDermott and Mark Billingham, and they'd written them, and they were superb. And I recently read a collection by Kate Ellis because I'm busy reading all her Wesley Patterson books, and she has a collection of short stories which are mind-blowing and absolutely wonderful. It was the kind of thing that fortunately I'd already published on, because I read this book and thought, oh, I could never be as good as this. I sort of put it down and then sort of had a drink, got over myself and thought, well, stop comparing yourself, just get on with your own thing. But yeah, there's some fantastic stuff out there.
So one of the things I like asking everyone at the moment is, what have you read recently that you've really enjoyed? What have been like your reads of the year so far?
I read Steve Kavanagh's The Accomplice, which I bought. I went to see him. He was talking at Waterstones in Yeovil a couple of weeks ago, and he was so funny. Just some of his funny stories just had us all kind of falling about. And he's very good. I mean, he's really prominent now, and yet he tells some wonderful stories against himself. And I hadn't read any of his books. I'd heard of the 13. I saw people raving about 13, so when his name came up, I thought, I must go and listen to him. And I bought The Accomplice, and I read it in about 4 days, which is very unusual for me. It's just such a page turner. And he's somebody, Kate, who started writing books set in America before he'd even been to America. So it can be done. But they're really good, real lots of twists you just don't see coming. So I really enjoyed Steve Kavanagh's The Accomplice.
Right. Yeah, well, I think a lot of people in the group know what I've been reading recently, because I posted the pictures of Peter May's books, the Lewis trilogy, and the first one, the Black House, because I'd just been on the Isle of Lewis and then came across Peter May's trilogy, and they blew my mind. They were fantastic. I mean, as and of themselves, they're brilliantly written, fantastic story, but having just been on the island and being able to absolutely picture what he was talking about, the peat cutting and how that's done, and the effect that has on the landscape and just the weather, because we got a real Lewis experience, blown off our motorbikes as we're sort of riding around on the island. But yeah, having just been and then been able to read Black House and Lewis Man was absolutely outstanding. I put the picture up on there and on the group under my real name, and they were just fantastic. I can't recommend them highly enough. And we read the first two whilst we were in Scotland in a tent, having just got off the island, so it was also quite atmospheric. And the third one has just arrived, so we're about to fight over who gets to read it first. And I will read more of Peter May's books because they're absolutely superb. And then I also posted to say that I just read one of Alexander McCall Smith's, the first in the Isabel Dalhousie series, the mystery there, which of course is a much gentler, is much more of a cozy mystery. But the way he depicts Edinburgh is absolutely fantastic. So, two very different authors, very different kind of books, but both which I would recommend. But particularly if people haven't read the Peter May Lewis trilogy, go grab it.
A hearty recommendation to avoid family squabbles over books that me and my family do is you have the paperback and the Kindle version. Then everyone can read them at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I just figured that my to be read pile is so big that there's plenty others I could and should be reading. I don't have much of an argument for not letting my wife read it first.
Well, the problem in our house is that if you well, not my house anymore actually, but if you let my dad read anything first, so my dad founded our group, you let him read anything first before you have to be okay with spoilers because he cannot keep secrets. So So he will literally read like the book and then tell you everything that's happened in it.
Oh dear.
Oh no.
Because this happens, and you're like, well, why am I reading it now? So he's banned. If we're going to read something that he's going to like to read as well, we all have to read it at the same time.
Mind you, that can also give you the opportunity to discuss the books. I mean, I'd mentioned in that post that I'd bought the book, and then we happened to see it in a little free library at a campsite, so my wife could read it at the same time, and that was really interesting because we could compare notes, and there was the kind of, oh, did you read this? That was great, and where are you up to? But also, discussing, how evocative his writing was, and how we felt characters were portrayed. So it was a little mini book club going on, which was a lot of fun.
Now I'm curious about your writing processes, both of you, and I think because Nikki, you sound like you're quite. I thought you'd be really meticulous, but then you were like, I don't quite know where I'm going with this. I'm curious about how you both go around it. Are you like very detailed planners? Are you somewhere on the pantsing side? Are you a mixture?
I used to be a pantser, but I painted myself into so many corners that I have tried to plan more. So I kind of had general outline. I usually have the opening, something, the kind of the hook to hang it on, if you like. And then I kind of progress, and I need to get the first third of the book really established. I kind of know where I'm going, but I leave plenty of room to change things as it goes along, because, as I'm sure we all know, characters have a way of taking over, haven't they? And they don't always do what they're supposed to. And so I leave room for manoeuvre and move to sort of enough room to change the direction of things a bit. But if I know roughly where it's going to end up, I just feel slightly more confident that I know where I'm going, and it won't go too far adrift. So I'm more a planner than I used to be. I tend to get fairly careful with things like the ages of the characters. So I'll have spreadsheets showing when people were born, so I can, which is often quite handy, because you'll think, oh, they must have been at school together. That's good to know. Or that there's 2-year gap between them. Well, that's whatever. But it just keeps me on track, so I don't suddenly have somebody being completely the wrong age for whatever they're doing, or having Lincoln never actually aging at all. So, but otherwise, in general, I try to keep fairly fluid, but to have a general idea where I'm going.
Yeah, I'm very much a plotter. I've tried pantsing, and it has not worked. And I pretty much had to go back to the beginning and sort of re-edit stuff. So I need to know what's happening next. How much detail I've gone into will vary. One or two of the books, I've had Excel spreadsheets with scenes laid out, and who's here and who's where. I'm not doing that so much on this one, but I do know the overall storyline. I know who the killer is. I know who all the red herrings are, all that kind of stuff. But what I'm doing slightly differently this time is I know what I'm writing for the week ahead. So I know what happens in the writing process for the next couple of weeks, but I've not actually penned it down, and I don't know much of the detail. But if I don't know what's happening next, I find it really hard to sit down and sort of get on with it. And I've been trying various different techniques as to how to do that and to lay it all out, but very much a plotter. And then the first draft I always refer to as the vomit draft, which I just get it all out, get it all. And if there's a bit of research that needs to be done, I'm not sure of somebody's surname, then an X will go in, or I'll highlight it or something, and then I go back and edit. And as I said before, I have to be fairly careful because of some history timelines. On this one, the age of people, like you were saying, is really important. So I have an overall timeline, which will then go to my editor and proofreader to help them, so they know when it's happening and people's ages and all that sort of thing. And I'll mark things like certain parties that get a reference, or all that kind of stuff. So relatively detailed. As with you, Nikki, that's not to say things don't change, and I will discover, oh my God, he's the killer. How did I not realize? And that would I love it when that happens, that it turns out that I'm wrong. That's often some of the best moments for me. So I've had that before now, where it's been either a completely different motive or completely different killer, or and then I'll be writing about somebody who really is a kind of background character, and I suddenly realize okay, they're not the killer, but boy, have they got a good motive. I need to build them in a bit more. So I play around with it a lot as I go, but I at least need to sit down and know in theory what's happening.
Yes, yeah.
Certainly how I work, yeah.
So one of my other favourite questions for author chats, and I don't think I've asked it in ages, right, is would you make a graphic novel version of one of your books?
That was a very interesting question. Yes, I mean it would be quite interesting. I tend to think of the books very visually. I tend to imagine them as television programs and kind of thinking the sort of scene changes and thinking of them like that rather than on the written page. Graphic novel, I just wonder whether it would kind of give too much away. That perhaps sometimes, I don't know, it could be quite interesting. It is an interesting question, interesting concept with a crime novel, because obviously you often are keeping things back. You're not revealing to the readers or not. I mean, in my case with the Lincoln books, often the readers are one step ahead of Lincoln. The readers know more than Lincoln does because there's a chapter from the viewpoint of another character. So Lincoln is possibly going up quite the wrong avenue because he believes something is so. The reader's saying, no, don't do that because we know what happened. With a graphic novel, I suppose everything's sort of laid out, isn't it? But I suppose it could be done. It's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I've read some graphic novels and I've surprised myself by how much I've enjoyed them, but it's not something I read quite a lot of. I personally wouldn't do it, but I do think it's a great idea. And I like it when people talk about it. I will visualize things quite a lot as well. I have no particular ambition to see the series filmed. I mean, people will say, oh, that would be great, you should put it on TV because of the settings and things. And I'm like, yeah, no, I just want to write another book. But I think because of the settings of mine, I'm not entirely convinced it would work because of the settings and the scenery and that sort of thing. However, it would be a lot of fun, actually. I'd love to see how an illustrator drew Joyce, who is a particularly flamboyant character, and who's the one who got her own series. And my readers love her wardrobe. So it would be a lot of fun to see some of her clothing choices sketched out on paper. I think actually for that alone, it might be worth having a go now I think about it. So yeah, not in my plans, but yeah, I want to see somebody else's visual interpretation of the clothing involved.
I ask it just basically because I love them. It's one of my favorite things to read. So
yeah, there's one of the graphic novels that I read and loved, and I'm going to get the title wrong. Is it Persephone? And I think it's a story of an Israeli woman, and I think it's quite a politically charged book, but it's absolutely fantastic. And I wasn't sure going into it whether or not I would enjoy it, but I was pulled through every single page, and for a graphic novel, that really took me by surprise. But it won me over as a book genre. I think it's Persephone. So one of our viewers. That's it. Yeah. Absolutely brilliant. So yeah, I think they're a fantastic form of book, but not for me, not at the moment.
Yeah, I love them. And I just like to sneak it in because I don't think many people get asked it.
No.
One of our group's favourite questions that is a nice way, because we're sort of coming up to about 5 minutes left. So it's one of the nice ones to finish off with, is what are your most memorable moments as an author so far?
Sorry, in what?
What are your most memorable moments as an author so far?
Oh, I mean, for me, going back to the library in Wiltshire, where I first decided I was going to be a writer. I'd always thought I was going to, be famous when I was young, and I found this book in the children's library, and it was written by a girl called Lindsay Campbell. It was called Horse of Air, and she was 15, and I was determined that I was going to get published before I was 15. Well, obviously didn't happen, but it was wonderful going back to that library a couple of years ago to give a talk, and it was just wonderful. It was as if I'd come full circle to be talking to people, in the place that very close to where I'd imagined the Lincoln stories, and really I'm determined to become an author. And it took a bit longer than I thought it would, but even so, it was just nice to feel I got closure, in a sense, in that respect.
Yeah. I sort of had a couple of moments, I suppose. I mean, one was when I got an email from an author who, when I was starting to read cozy mysteries and thinking, oh, I'd quite like to have a go at this, I started reading books by an American author called Gigi Pandian. And I'd sent her an email just to say, I think your books are fantastic. Thank you for the pleasure they bring. And she said, oh, thank you. That's a very nice email to receive. And then some months later, I got an email from her saying, we're now members of the Mutual Appreciation Society because I've read your books and I think they're fantastic. And I can't put them down. So that was a nice moment. My last trip back to the UK, my parents still live in Derbyshire, not far from Buxton. And I'd done an interview for a Buxton newspaper. And I just landed. I was exhausted. My flights had all been delayed. And I got back and I was having some lunch, having just walked in. And my dad said to me, oh, have you seen this? And he pulls the newspaper out and there's a full page on me and this latest book. And it was because, it was the area I grew up in. It was the Buxton Advertiser. It was the local newspaper. And I suppose a little bit like you, going back to being that kid at school who loved the arts, who was a complete bookworm. And there I was in the local paper as a published author, got a whole, spread to myself. And that was a nice little moment of validation and full circle, especially now that I'm living in the US. It was really nice to go home and see that in my home area, really. Yeah.
Have you got any other author events coming up, either of you?
I'm talking to a book group in Yeovil, beginning of September, and I'm talking at the new Melksham Library in Wiltshire later in September. So that's looking forward to those two.
Yeah, no readers events lined up at the moment. I have done a few book groups because I always say to my readers, if you want me to zoom in, then wherever you are in the world, I will come and chat to your book group and take questions. And I've done that a few times. But the diary is currently free with those. I've got some writers' conferences coming up, but not readers events at the moment.
And then we've got 3 minutes left. So finish us off with a reminder about yourselves and your book. Show us off some book covers and things so anyone who's watching knows what they're going to go and buy.
Yeah, I've got The Price of Silence and Shame of Innocence. And the latest one, which is The Promise of Salvation. So all set in the heavily disguised Salisbury area. Police procedurals, quite gritty. Quite a bit of swearing in one of them, and all set in the Salisbury area, but just not called Salisbury.
And I've got, so that's the first of the Charlton House mysteries, Death by Dark Roast, and there's eight of those, and that's the first of the Joyce and Ginger's Murder en Suite. My website is katepadams.com. I'm on Instagram and Facebook as that. So yes, if you want to, through the pages of a book, visit the beautiful Derbyshire countryside and join some fun, because I've put them on the humorous end as well as there's lots of history in there. Mystery with a side order of history is how I describe the books. Yeah.
They sound excellent. So everyone who's watching, off you go now. Got a couple of minutes left to go and buy some books. And then all that's left for me to say is thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks.